Lee Kuan Yew is here as Singapore's founding father. He served as prime minister for more than 30 years until 1990. He now serves as minister mentor to the current prime minister, his son. At age 86, he is regarded as an elder statesman on the global stage whose views are widely sought. He's in the United States for meetings in New York with people like Henry Kissinger, in Washington with people like the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and the president of the World Bank, Bob Zoellick. He will also receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. I am pleased to have him back at this table to get a worldview that he is highly regarded for understanding the dynamics of the world that we have come from and the world that we are going to. So welcome.
Thank you.
Where are we, you think, in terms of a kind of world order? We have gone through, in the 89 and 90, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Then we had the United States engaged in the Middle East in a long war that continues. Then we had the global economic crisis. So many people say, what is going to come out of this?
Well, I see the imbroglio in Iraq and Afghanistan as distractions. It's not going to change the world, whatever happens to Iraq or Afghanistan, because the major changes that are taking place is the recovery of China and to a lesser extent of India, the places they occupied 2 centuries or 3 centuries ago before Western colonization blanketed them. 3 centuries ago, they were, between the two of them, 60% of the world GDP, just the population and the production that they put out. China is again on the growth path. She's now a member of WTO. She knows that every year she's growing faster than anybody else and can do that for another 20, 30 years because they've got such an enormous number of workers back in the West, in the hinterland. 8%, 9%, 10%, no trouble at all. But after that, then they reach a ceiling where the labor is concerned, and then they got to increase productivity. But by then, in 30 years, they would have an economy, not per capita, but in total terms, bigger than the USA, which means they've got resources to build up political, strategic, and other influence. And in fact, in anticipation of that, people already treat her differently because they know that this is going to be a big fellow around the block. It's a watershed. I mean, the world order that we knew was dominated by the Caucasian peoples. Europe, technology, sailing ships, then aircraft. They conquered the world. Industrialization.
Globalization.
Globalization. Well, industrialization first, and then they globalize it. And America is the extension of Europe, with a difference, in that she's more embracing of other races. The 20th century was the American century. The first half of the 21st century, a large part of it will still be the American. But I believe the second half, you will have to share top places with China and also with India, make space for them too.
You have said in a speech I read just today that the relationship between the United States and China, based on what you just said, has become the most important global geopolitical issue of the century.
Yes.
How they both handle it.
From the Chinese side, in a very pragmatic, almost cold-blooded and clinical fashion. On the American side, there's been some vacillation. First China as an adversary, strategic adversary, then China as a strategic partner, then China as a stakeholder, then China as a not carrying its weight. But
China wants to be, as in the famous words of Bob Zoellick, now the president of the World Bank, and they want to be a stakeholder.
As Bob Zoellick coined that phrase.
In Singapore, I think.
Well, I mean, whatever it was.
Wherever it was, you know.
And the Chinese were wondering what that meant.
No, they didn't know what stakeholder meant. They now know.
Yes, they looked up the dictionaries. They didn't get much out of it. They discussed it with friends, and I'm one of the friends. So I said to them, well, that means although you're not a shareholder in the company, you have an interest in the company because you sell to the company, and if the company goes bust, you got no customer. And if you got no customer, your trade will go down and you have unemployment. So you have an interest in keeping that company going. And they have an interest in keeping you going because you are a good customer. You're a good producer for them. Cheap goods, cheap products, and good quality.
Well, there's great hope that they will become more of a consuming economy and we'll become more of a saving economy. You point that out.
The Chinese have had 4,000 years or 5,000 years of all kinds of catastrophes. Earthquakes, floods, famine, invasions, where the central government failed entirely, and nobody can help you. You've got to help yourself. Let me tell you this anecdote. I was having my game left shoulder from golf being massaged by a very superior Chinese master who attends to their leaders. I mean, they sent him down to try and fix my game shoulder, and he fixed it in 3 weeks. So we had to chat because I have 45 minutes on the couch, what can I do? So there was a flood up the Yangtze River. So I said, oh, well, now you've opened up. You get lots of relief supplies. He looked at me and puzzled. He says, you don't understand. The relief supplies will arrive in Shanghai. The floods will prevent it from reaching the villages. And each village knows that it's going to happen from time to time. And up on a little hill, they keep the rice, the salt, and all the essentials safe so that they will survive such a calamity. And that habit, just like the Japanese have the kit underneath their bed for earthquakes, that is their habit of surviving. So they stuff the money under the pillow because banks are not trustworthy. Or gold.
And that habit is not going to change. That habit of saving.
It will take a long time. It will take 1-2 generations of affluence. And it may happen in the cities, and it's not going to happen in the countryside.
You say this about America as well. You talk about the Chinese as having patience, and they have persistence, and they have discipline, and they have organization. But you say America has something special that will be part of the inevitable competition. It is its resilience and, more importantly, its creativity.
Yes, of course. Look, it's not just American talent that gets you here. You're just 300 million people, and they got 1,300 million, and very many more able people. But you are attracting all the adventurous minds from all over the world and embracing them, and they become part of your team. Now, I don't see 2 million Indians and 500,000 other peoples, Japanese, Koreans, and others, becoming part of China. I mean, first, the language is so difficult.
Yes.
Secondly, the culture is not embracive. How do you fit in?
What should the United States do as it looks at the inevitable growth of China as a dominant player? What would be a wise foreign policy?
I think...
Because you have 2 or 3 decades before it reaches its full strength.
No, I think...
Because you have 2 or 3 decades before it reaches its full strength.
No, even in 3 decades it won't reach its full strength. In 3 decades, its per capita is still about 1/3 of America.
Right. Its gross domestic product.
Well, for it to reach America's standard of living and standard of technology will take more than 100 years.
So what should the United States do while it has the position it has now?
I think make sure that they feel that they are accepted at the top table.
Make sure that China feels like it's accepted at the top table.
Yes, your place is waiting for you when you make it, but you've got to play by the rules of the game. And the key really is whether the next generation, this generation understands it. They know that they have no chance competing against the West, America especially, in technology, and especially military technology. There's absolutely no chance. Let me build an aircraft carrier to guard the shipping lines where they carry oil and other minerals. This is the first time where the Chinese are growing, but dependent on the world for its resources.
But they're going around the world signing up contracts in Iran and in Africa. And
absolutely, but before that, it's all within the Chinese empire. They don't have to worry about the rest of the world. This time, they have to worry about the rest of the world, because without the resources, the oil, the iron ore, nickel, whatever, the growth will stop.
Will they be able to create the domestic demand that's necessary as they find exports reduced?
Slowly. But in the meantime, there's keeping the economy going by enormous expenditure on infrastructure in the West. High-speed roads, high-speed railways, airports, telephone lines, bringing water from the south up to the north where it's arid and dry. Huge, enormous, mammoth projects. That keeps it going.
Will India have an advantage, some argue, because it's democracy, and China is not?
Let me put it this way. If India were as well organized as China, it would go at a different speed. But it's going at the speed it is because it is India. It's not one nation, it's many nations. It has 320 different languages and 32 official languages. So no prime minister in Delhi can at any one time speak in a language and be understood throughout the country. You can do that in Beijing.
So in the end, do you think that system will change in Beijing?
I think it will have to change as the people get more and more urbanized. Today it's about 40% urban, or less than 40% urban, more than 60% rural. When you reach the tipping point and 60, 70% are urban with mobile phones, PDAs, you can download anything you want, send any messages you want. It's already had its effect. I mean, the Sichuan earthquake, in the old days, nobody would know about it, except seismologists who say, well, such an earthquake took place. Here, immediately, SMS, all the Chinese knew, the world knew, and they had to go public. And the prime minister took a plane full of pressmen and went there and tried to comfort them and assure them that they'll be...
So you're saying that communication and technology and the flow of information will have an impact?
And the urbanization. If you're in the countryside, that's different. You can be isolated. But when you are together in an urban center, and they're planning 10 urban centers with 40 billion people each. That's their plans, on the greater scheme of things. 40 billion people in 4 mega cities, all with, you can call up a meeting anytime you want. You call a riot anytime you want. So it's a different world. Therefore, you have to pay attention to what people think. And today they're watching the internet very carefully, because they know what the average person in the cities are thinking.
Now, what are they afraid of? Where is their fear of?
Well, it's not afraid. They just do not. They just do not want to lose control.
Well, so they're afraid of control.
No, they are afraid that they will lose control of the situation. In the old days, way back in Mao's days, everybody is dependent on the state. The state is the only employer. And everybody has what you call a hukou. Hukou is a residence permit. And if you lose your job because you're anti the government or you're a crook or whatever, you've had it. There's no other employer. But today, there are multiple employers, all companies.
So people have options.
Yes, absolutely. And that means the government has lost control over the people. I mean, they can be entrepreneurs, they run their own businesses, shops, whatever it is.
But are they moving towards some form, not a Western form, some form of more participation in the political process?
They are co-opting all the successful people into the communist system.
That's a smart policy.
Jiang Zemin calls it the three representatives. So whether you're an artist, whether you're a businessman, whether you're an activist, anybody who's got the extra drive to contribute to a greater China, come and join us.
Coming out of the global economic crisis, even though the United States is a dominant country, it is forced to look to build and to engage and build coalitions on a whole range of big issues. And there is never now a guarantee of unanimous support. It's hard to put together, for example, sanctions against Iran.
Iran is a special case. Iran got oil and gas. The Chinese desperately need oil and gas. Russia is playing a game with Iran. Russia doesn't need oil and gas, but Russia wants to cut the U.S. down to size and remind the U.S., you need me to run the war. With the Chinese, they are doing their calculations. I think in extremis, they must know that if they buck the world, once the Russian says, all right, we agree, I would bet 50-50 that the Chinese will also say.
So if the Russians say we'll engage in sanctions, the Chinese will follow.
They would not want to be the odd man out and be held responsible.
What if the United States would find another partner or another supplier of energy for Iran?
No, in place of Iran.
Yes.
Where do you find it?
Well, in the Middle East,
in
Saudi Arabia, Not possible.
Not possible.
But I had a Chinese diplomat say to me that they would welcome that. That if in fact they did not have a necessity of needing Iranian oil, they would go along with sanctions because they don't think
they need Iranian oil, they need Arabian oil, they need Nigerian oil, they need Angolan oil, they need
all the oil they can find anywhere.
Yes, of course.
But to fuel the economic growth at 8%.
Absolutely.
Tell me about Russia and how you see Russia today.
Well, look, I'm doing a little bit of business in Russia.
Yes.
I'm also a member of the board of the governors of the Skolkovo Business School, invited to join it by Medvedev, who's now the president. So I speak as one who is a semi-Russian colleague. I would say they would do enormously better if they could get their system right. The system's not as functional as it should be, because it has gone haywire. They have lost control over the various provinces. Putin is trying to bring it back to the center, but it's difficult.
What do you think of the relationship between Putin and Medvedev?
Everybody knows that Mr. Medvedev is a very good friend of Putin, and also knows that Mr. Putin is a very powerful fellow. And Mr. Medvedev is working through very powerful men called Silivokis, who are all from the FSB.
Which is a former KGB.
Yes, I mean, so I would not. Mr. Medvedev is a highly intelligent man. He's a good friend of Putin, and he sees no reason why he should want to clash with Putin.
And Mr. Putin will return to be president another day.
I would say the probabilities are high.
But you also said in the speech that I read that their capabilities of Russia are limited. the capabilities are limited?
Well, they've got enormous nuclear arsenal. But what else? Their army is a very different army now. The Air Force, they're building new fighters, but I mean, their Navy. And their population is declining. AIDS, alcohol, drugs, and pessimism. I mean, if every year more Russians die than Russians are born, because people are not optimistic. In America, people are optimistic and say, right, I'll bring a child up bring a child into the world. But when your life is so harsh, and from time to time it gets better when the oil price goes up, but that's only momentary. You have a different view of the future, so what's the point of this?
What about Japan, back to Asia?
I think the Japanese need an overhaul.
In terms of that political system?
Yeah. And in terms of their acceptance of immigrants. Their birth rate is 1 point, their fertility rate is just slightly higher than ours. We are 1.29, they're 1.38, and they're shrinking. But we are a small population, so we can make up with any numbers, from young, bright Indians, young, bright Chinese, young, bright Malaysians, and all the people around the world. And some Middle Easterners, we now have Ukrainians serving in our army, our citizens. Because they think Singapore...
Ukrainians in Singapore?
Yes, of course. Russians too. East Europeans. And Britishers who have married our local girls. And British women who married Singapore men. But Japan does not want immigrants. So they are stuck. Today they have 3.2 working persons to support one adult. In 2055, they'll have 1.2 persons to support one adult.
And immigrants has been America's strength.
Absolutely. But mind you, immigration of the highly intelligent and highly hardworking, very hardworking people. If you get immigration of the fruit pickers, you may not get very far.
I met a Chinese delegation recently who's here in the last couple of weeks, and I said to a very important member of the government, not at the highest level, but very important, what are you doing here? He said, we're trying to get highly educated Chinese.
To go back?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
To go back.
Yes.
I said, well, what do you say to them? Say to them, you'll have opportunity, and I say to them, the homeland needs you. That's what he said.
Yeah, that doesn't sell.
What
will sell is you can leave anytime you want and allow your children special educational facilities, and all of you can keep your American green card or passports.
And that works?
Well, I'm not sure whether it'll work, but they'll go back and test the waters. Some. But will you go back and stay? Maybe, because of the older generation, they are emotionally tied up. But will your children stay? No. Their upbringing has been here, and they go back to China and they say, wow, this is a very regimented society. Papa, I'm going back. So, no, there's no comparison. I mean, there are two, and there's chalk and cheese between the two societies, especially for young children who can see how independent American children are and can grow up and become anything they want, beatniks if you like, or
to use an old expression,
or whatever in China. You come out like sausages.
Yes, exactly. So will the Chinese be able to say, one of the things that you point to in terms of this relationship between this competition, you say China and the United States will have competition, but they must avoid conflict.
Yeah. No, I think both sides don't want conflict.
They don't want conflict. Yeah. China wants to spend time focusing on its internal development, its economic development.
China wants time to grow.
To grow.
If there's going to be any conflict, let's postpone it for 50 years.
But inevitably, at some point, as China grows, it's going to want to be the dominant nation in the world because it'll have...
But it is not going back to Tang China or Han China, where they were the only dominant power in the world. This time they're going back to a world where there are several dominant poles that's as inventive and more creative than them.
So we're looking at a multipolar world.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll never go back to sort of the kind of thing that we had between the Soviet Union and the United States.
No. There'll be the U.S., there'll be China. The Indians are going to be themselves. They're not going to be anybody's lackey. They may not be as big as China in GDP.
And you also suggest they've got to develop a manufacturing capacity.
Yes, of course. You're going to have... Europe will be an economic force. It will not be a strategic, political, or military force because they can't get together. The foreign policy.
It's inevitable that they can never get together?
I'm not saying it's inevitable, but if you look at them, there's still 27 different nations. I mean, they won't accept one language, although they all use English as a second language. But you tell them that in Brussels you speak either French or English, or either your own language or English, which is what is actually happening in committees, they absolutely refuse. So how long will that take to disappear? I don't know. I think it may never happen.
Take Singapore.
Yes.
You have said that Singapore has to maintain its relevance.
Yes.
It has to be a place that people want to invest in. It has to be a place, go ahead.
It has to be a place that's useful to the world. Otherwise it wouldn't exist.
And that's what you had created since the founding of the modern city-state.
Yes. We have made ourselves relevant to the world.
And how will you maintain your relevancy?
By keeping on changing. You cannot maintain your relevance by just staying put. The world changes. There are shifts in the geopolitics and the economics of the world. We've got to watch it and we've got to ride it. You surf with them. As the surf comes this way, you ride the surf. We are keeping our links with America, with Japan, with Europe. They brought us to where we are.
And you're not going to have to choose sides. No other nation will have to choose sides.
We absolutely refuse to choose sides.
But
we will not choose sides between America and China or between China and India.
But I just read today an announcement by your sovereign wealth fund in Singapore of like over, what, $1.3 billion in new investments, none coming to the United States, going to China, to India, to Brazil, and I've forgotten where else.
It's just 1.3 billion out of 300 billion is just...
But none to the United States, mostly going to what they call the BRIC countries.
Yeah, but the United States at the moment is in somewhat of a unstable state. Is the dollar going to decline?
What do you think?
Yes, it is cheap. But supposing you buy and the deficits grow and Ben Bernanke is unable, your federal chairman is unable to draw enough liquidity out of the market and you got hyperinflation. Wow, it'll go down and you've lost money. So everybody's hedging. And there's a very small
So they're hedging by looking at other places too.
Yeah, but where? You tell me.
No, tell me where. If it's not the United States, there's nowhere to go right now.
We go to partly to the euro.
Yeah.
We're not going to, very little to Japan, Australia, New Zealand. The RMP, the Chinese yuan, is highly controlled. They can make it go up, they can make it go down, and you're not quite sure which way it's going to go. Whereas in the US, you can look at the figures and you can read the federal reports every time they make a decision, and you can make your guess.
You also said that China and the United States, they both have to change their mindset.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, for the Americans, you've got to cease to think in terms of the Chinese as of they are today. Exactly. The Chinese as they are today are people who have been suffering for a very long time, especially under Mao, and who feel that the world is cruel to them. And therefore they're very edgy. The Chinese, if you talk to the Chinese leaders now, those over 60, they're all with Russian as their second language.
Right.
In 25 years' time, you're going to meet a generation who are now in the lower ranks, who have been to America and Britain and Europe, and will be English-speaking and have different models in their minds. And they will know that they are not going to be the sole power in the world. Not ever again. Because this is a globalized world. And they know that they are dependent on the world for their growth. The resources that they need.
So they're going to be part of the world.
Yes. Before meaning up till the time when the British and the others colonialized them in a partial way, everything grew within China. Whatever they needed, they captured territory.
Then they found global markets.
George H.W. Bush invited them to sell to America. He was the U.S. representative before they had ambassadors. And he had a liking for them. They were good to him. So he says, you sell to us. And they sold, and it succeeded. And they said, yeah, this is the way to get out of our poverty.
That was your friend Deng Xiaoping that said that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then they got into the World Trade Center as a member, WTO. I've just met Bob Rubin today, and he and Henry Kissinger and I told him that Clinton turned down Chu Rong-chi for this WTO.
Right.
So he said, that's a great mistake, because if you turn them down, all they will do is to be a spoiler. They'll reverse engineer all your patents, and you find generic products and imitations on the market. Now, bring them in, get them to observe the rules.
Well, that's a big if.
Yeah.
You got to get them to observe the rules.
They are going to have to observe the rules, and they will.
And they understand that.
No, because they are making patents of their own now.
They want to open the markets around the world.
That's
and
right.
be a part of the global economy.
No. They are doing research almost in every sector now, including life sciences.
Here's which is something that Singapore got involved in very much with stem cell.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, we figured out that with these smart fellows around, and so many of them, whatever we do, they will do in time and better. But there are some areas where they will take a very long time to be able to do what we are doing. And that's to change the system from opacity to transparency, from no protection for copyright to protection for copyright, and rule of law. There are two rules of law in China, one for the ordinary citizen and the other for 76 million members of the Communist Party. And the judges will do what they know what the leaders require to keep the country stable. So would you, look, we've got all the big pharma companies in Singapore.
Yes.
They're not in China. They will sell their products.
Because you have protection, you have rule of law, you have protection of patents.
And we're doing joint research with them on the effect of these new drugs on various types, racial types of the population.
Can you make an argument that a country who leads in technology and science, it will go a long way in terms of their place in the world?
Yes, of course. That's why I think the U.S. will steer a very powerful and considerable inventor and creator of new products.
When you look at the U.S. and its relationship and its concern about oil and its politics in the Middle East, you think it's a distraction? You think that it...
No, I'm not saying the Middle East is a distraction. I think trying to make a country out of Afghanistan is a distraction. There was no country for the last 30, 40 years. They've just been fighting each other since the last king was chased out.
Right.
How on earth are you going to put these little bits together? It's not possible.
So therefore you do what?
I'm not an expert, but in my simple mind, it strikes me that you won in Iraq, and you won in Afghanistan, not because you fought the Taliban, but because you got the Northern Alliance to fight them.
Exactly.
And you provided the Northern Alliance with intelligence and the capabilities to bomb them and target them. And they captured the South. Now,
yeah, but I mean, they've got governance problems over there, too.
yeah, that's all right, but that's their problem. Why do you want to make it your problem?
So what would you do? Would you pull all the troops out and let whatever happens to Afghanistan happens to Afghanistan? It's not that threatening to the United States. Is that the argument?
I don't know about that, because I think it cannot be more difficult for the United States than to have your troops stuck there. The Russians are a brutal, ruthless, so a lot of army people.
Right.
120,000 of them were there. But they had to leave.
Yeah. And we helped that because we supported the Mujahideen.
Yeah.
The Mujahideen had a lot of support from around the world who wanted to see the Soviet Union take it.
Yeah. But whether or not the Soviets helped them to get the Americans out, I think the Americans and the NATO troops, the NATO members are very skeptical of the outcome.
Even to the point of not wanting to send their troops in certain kinds of combat areas.
Quite right.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, because you get shot for nothing.
But those who argue that if Afghanistan is abandoned, first of all, the world will say, or people will say, look, you left Afghanistan once before after the Soviets had left, and now you're leaving again. The United States has to stand for something, and it has to show that it's prepared to stay.
No.
You don't buy that at all.
No.
Look.
You know, right?
You must have a wonderful conversation with your friend Henry Kissinger then.
No.
Oh, stop there, though. Where do you and Henry Kissinger differ on a view of the U.S. role in the world?
I don't think there's any difference.
Is that right? How would you define it then?
I think the U.S. can be a benign stabilizer of the world order.
A benign stabilizer.
Yes. Without the U.S., East Asia would never have grown. You brought peace and technology, trade and investments, and East Asia flourished.
Well, that's clear. It's happened in East Asia.
Yeah,
You're talking about Singapore and North and South Korea.
No,
and
absolutely. So, and if you're not there,
how do we do that in the Middle East? How do we do that when you've got the kind of conflict that's taking place?
You can't solve all the problems in the world. Some problems just got to be resolved by the.
And so what are your priorities?
For Singapore?
No, for the United States. What should be the priorities?
I cannot think. I'm not an American. I do not calculate in American terms. I calculate what Americans are likely to do in relation to what will happen to me.
Yeah. Well, that's why they listen to you. That's why you're going to see Mr. Bernanke tomorrow, and that's why you're going to see Larry Summers, and that's why you're going to see all these American officials. They want to know how you assess the way the world is working today. And your central message is you got to engage, you got to make the Chinese feel like they are a worthy part of the world community, and you got to help them join the WTO and all the things they want to do.
No, they've already joined.
I know they've joined, but you've got to make sure that they're treated fairly.
You've got to make sure that they understand membership requires certain obligations. Right. And the obligations start with responsibility.
But you also say about the United States, it has to realize that most problems need an American participation in order to be solved.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you and I had a conversation once about a whole range of leaders, and you said to me the man that you most admired of all the people you'd ever met was Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah.
That's what you told me.
Yeah.
Deng Xiaoping admired you too because he sent Chinese 30, 40,000 of them to Singapore to figure out what you were doing. Am I right?
Yes.
What was it you were doing that he wanted to see?
He was astonished when he came for the first time in 1978 to tell us to prevent Vietnam from invading Cambodia because they're doing it on behalf of the Russians. Then he found a Singapore which was contrary to what he was given in his brief.
Yes.
He found a prosperous, orderly society, everybody owning their own homes and with a job. So I said, how did you get there? I said, well, we educated our people, and look at all these companies, Americans, Japanese, Europeans. They bring technology, they train our people, we learn how to do things. And because we're cheaper, after a while we become general managers and company managing directors. And we learn how to do that, and we become suppliers to them. So he said, oh, you made use of capitalism to build a more egalitarian society. Everybody owns their own home. I will do the same.
And he did?
He did. He did. He went back and declared 12 special economic zones. Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Dalian, and so on. All the coastal cities, and it succeeded.
So he was the greatest man you ever met because he understood, because of the results. He changed the nation, and therefore...
He's a member of the old guard. He fought in the Long March.
Right.
He chased the KMT out across the Yangtze. He led the...
He was a victim of the Cultural Revolution.
Yes, but he was realistic. He knew the system was not working. He knew that they were going to end up down in a deep hole. And he decided, against all the advice of his fellow old guards, that we would change course.
And he had the brains and the power to pull it off.
Yes. And when they tried to stop him in 1992 from going too fast, he went down to Shenzhen and said, learn from all countries in the world, and most of all, learn from Singapore. The order is good, and they are a very prosperous society.
You've never had a moment that you thought Singapore was too authoritative, have you? Not one moment.
My job is to get the place going and give everybody a decent life and a decent education. And we are now the best educated people in the whole of East Asia. Our universities, we've got 4 universities, 4th one coming up.
So the end justifies the means, whatever it might be.
No, the ends were laudable. Everybody wants the same ends. Everybody wants good education, good health.
A good life, and their children do better than they did.
The means, I had the consent and support of the population. If they opposed me, and they did not cooperate, it wouldn't have worked.
You were in control of everything.
No.
Yes, you were. You know that.
But the numbers of people who were opposing me, including the communists in the very early days, was endless. Yeah.
Brings me to President Obama.
Yes.
What are your observations about him?
He's a very great and eloquent man who is very persuasive, and he's very able, and he's appointed very able people into his all key positions. And what impressed me most was that he's prepared to appoint people with opposing different minds. For instance, on his economic team, Larry Summers and Paul Volcker. And they're both very strong-minded people.
Well, Larry Summers has much more influence than Paul Volcker.
Yeah, but whatever it is, he's got to make the final judgment.
So he wants to listen to smart people who have different views. That's one thing you admire.
Yeah.
What would you want to ask him? What would you want to know about him?
Well, 2 things. First, that the 21st century will be a contest for supremacy in the Pacific, because that's where the growth will be, that's where the bulk of the economic strength of the globe will come from. Now, if you do not hold your ground in the Pacific, you cannot be a world leader. The world leader must hold his ground in the Pacific. That's number 1. Number 2, to hold that ground in the Pacific, you must not let your fiscal deficits and your dollar come to grief. If it comes to grief in the short term, and there's a run on the dollar for whatever reason, because your deficits are too big, and the financial community, the bankers and all the hedge funds and everybody come to a conclusion that you're not going to tackle these deficits, and they begin to move their assets out, that's real trouble.
And there is a risk of that perception today.
Absolutely. Yes. And Ben Bernanke knows that. And he's got somehow or the other to clean up and soak up the liquidity. But if he does it too soon, you get into another recession. But you cannot build up enormous deficits that allows all the, and do nothing about it, and people say, oh, well, this is hopeless.
Yeah. There's always a treasury, there's always a Federal Reserve, they'll make more money.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that.
They just print more money.
They will print more money, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
So deficits, the looming deficit of the United States is what worries you the most, because it will strike at the heart of the U.S. global leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's what happened, right? That's why we are in this recession, global recession.
After Afghanistan and then Iraq, questions were raised about America's credibility, its respect in the world.
Yeah.
It went down, correct? Or not? You never bought it?
No, it didn't go down. I think people were roughed up, by saying, you're either with me or you're against me.
Yeah.
And we don't need you. We'll go it alone. You do need them. You cannot go it alone. And all that ruffled everybody up. That was not necessary. But it's happened, and it's water under the bridge.
And President Obama is taking care of that in terms of the way he's reached out.
That's all right. But now he's got to prove by his actions that he can really implement this new policy of togetherness.
That's one thing, but it seems to me you are saying that the most important question people have about America, is its leadership, and the most important thing they have about America's leadership is its economic leadership. Can it take care of its own house? Because China is growing at 8% in the second half of 2009, and it looks better and better as it goes out.
No. The Chinese economy is nothing compared to the American economy.
Because the base is different.
Once you're stabilized. Yeah. But what the world wants to know, or what the thinking part of the banking and financial world wants to know, is that the Americans, the administration and the Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, have the will to take tough measures to put this right. Even if it's not going to be done overnight, but it is moving in that direction. It was going to put it right.
Okay, how do they do that?
You've created all these needs. I mean, you take health care. It's not going to be done at the same price, surely. I mean, you're covering 40 million extra people. So where's the money coming from? Now, if the world sees that you're not making any provision for that, and not letting it go, and it says, wow, this looks as if the elected leaders have lost their will to confront the people with the truth.
Is it more the Congress than the President?
Both. Both, I would say.
Are you confident that the United States will do something about its deficit, which is at $1.3 trillion for the last?
Well, if I'm not confident, and I have no hope of that, I wouldn't be here. Simple as that.
Be here meaning?
Be in America and wanting to understand what you're doing and what is going to come out of your policies. So I meet people who were in the administration, who are in the administration, to understand the thinking and the feel and their gut feeling of what's happening.
What's the most important change and most significant change in your way of thinking about the world over the last 20 years?
That the impossible can happen. I never thought that the Soviet Union would implode so easily.
Yeah.
And I never thought that the Chinese would abandon the communist system and move into the free market so readily. It was unthinkable 20 years ago. Both has happened. The world has changed.
And it's not clear exactly how it's all going to...
No, it is not exactly clear when it will happen.
Exactly.
But that it will happen now in the long term, 50 to 100 years, yes.
And the center of gravity is shifting to Asia.
Must be, because the population's there. The talent pool of 1.3 billion people, plus the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Vietnamese and the others, no, it can match Europe and America. But that talent pool was inert. Did not have science and technology, did not care about science and technology. But now, everything that you do, Asia is doing. You go into stem cell research, we are going into stem cell research. Tiny Singapore has to go into it in order to get into a field where the Chinese cannot compete with us. And the Chinese are in it in a very big way. They are watching you, and whatever you do, say, oh yes, we will do that. They are far behind, of course, but given time, they're going to catch up.
They're enormously curious.
They are.
Enormously curious.
Not just curious, they're enormously ambitious to catch up.
For good reasons and for good ends.
That you must ask them. But I think the reason is they have a sense of frustration that they were down for so long.
Right.
Let's make it now. Here's our chance.
And the United States has to encourage them.
No, you don't have to encourage them. You just got to understand that they don't want to be an honorary member of the West, unlike Russia. They're quite happy to be Chinese and to remain as such. So when you tell them you ought to do this, you ought to do that, they say, yes, thank you. And in the back of their minds, we have lasted 5,000 years, have you? That Beijing Olympics, if you watch it, what was the message?
We're back.
No, 5,000 years. And don't forget, we invented all these things. And we're going to go ahead the next 5,000 years. It's the only country where a language has survived 5,000 years. The only country where the present generation shares the same basic thinking as the past. And they're very proud of it. I mean, you read Hu Jintao's speech on the 60th anniversary. I mean, it's all translated on the web.
No.
What is it? We have 5,000 years of civilization. We are going to get there. And it's a rousing speech. It may take us a long time. You're going to work very hard. We will do it. That's their mood. So you don't have to encourage them. What you got to get them to understand is, with it goes responsibility. Hungry Africans, hungry, sick other people. This is a global problem. You can't just take copper and gold and to hell with it. You've got to have a responsibility for the people whose copper and gold you're mining. It goes with the job. And they will have to learn that. I think they're already beginning to learn that, so they're giving something back.
It's a pleasure to talk to you again, as always.